The laptop screen cast a pale glow across my home office as I worked through another cybersecurity audit at 2 in the morning. Lana's voice drifted from the bedroom, hushed but sharp enough to cut through the silence. "You're too sensitive," she whispered into her phone. I paused my typing. My wife never took calls this late. The cursor blinked on my screen like a digital heartbeat while I strained to listen. Her conversation ended with a soft laugh I hadn't heard directed at me in months. That was Monday. Tuesday brought line number 2 during breakfast. I'd mentioned the strange call, and Lana set down her organic smoothie with theatrical precision. "My friends think you're boring, Rowan. Maybe that's why I need other people to talk to." The words hit like a slap, but I kept my expression neutral. 20 years in military intelligence teaches you to observe before reacting. I stirred my coffee and noted how she avoided eye contact. Wednesday delivered the classic, "I need space to find myself." This gem came after I suggested we spend the weekend together, instead of her usual Thursday evening disappearance to some wellness seminar. She stood in our marble-countered kitchen, designer yoga outfit perfectly arranged, speaking like she was reading from a self-help manual. "Stop making everything about you," arrived Thursday morning when I asked where she'd been until midnight. She was applying expensive face cream in our bathroom mirror, and her reflection looked more annoyed than guilty. Friday's finale came with surgical precision. "I deserve better." 5 lines. 5 perfectly crafted relationship destroyers delivered with the confidence of someone who'd practiced them. If I had $1 for every self-help platitude my wife had absorbed, I could buy a new soul and a Porsche to go with it. I sat in my office that Friday night, surrounded by the tools of my trade: 3 monitors, encrypted drives, and a bottle of whiskey that had become my most reliable companion. The house felt different now, like a crime scene waiting for the investigators to arrive. Lana thought she was being clever. 36 years old, successful wellness entrepreneur, connected to all the right people in our wealthy Austin suburb of Larkwood. She'd built an empire selling meditation retreats and organic supplements to bored housewives who had more money than sense. But I wasn't just any husband. I was Rowan Kerrick, former military intelligence analyst turned cybersecurity consultant. I'd spent 2 decades learning how to find secrets people didn't want found. And my wife had just declared war. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here in Larkwood, where every lawn was perfect, and every smile hid 3 different scandals, I'd always been the outsider. The neighbors tolerated me because Lana vouched for my character, but they never quite trusted the quiet guy who worked with computers and didn't golf. They were about to learn why that was a mistake. I opened a new browser window and began typing. If Lana wanted space to find herself, I'd make sure she found exactly what she was looking for. Starting with her new life coach, Jace Arnell, who'd appeared in our lives 6 months ago with his perfect teeth and expensive car. Something about him had always felt wrong. The way he looked at Lana. The way she lit up when his name appeared on her phone. The mysterious Thursday sessions that ran so late. Time to find out what Jace was really coaching my wife to do. The background check software hummed to life, and I poured another whiskey. Outside, Larkwood slept peacefully, unaware that one of their own was about to pull back the curtain on the whole charade. My phone buzzed, a text from Lana. "Working late at the studio again. Don't wait up." I smiled and typed back, "Take all the time you need, honey. I'll be here when you're ready to talk." She had no idea how ready I was. The background check on Jace Arnell painted an interesting picture. Born in Oklahoma, moved to Texas 5 years ago, opened his wellness studio with cash payments that raised immediate red flags. No traditional business loans, no investors on record, just a sudden influx of money from unnamed sources. His criminal history made for fascinating reading. 2 arrests for firearms violations, 1 conviction overturned on a technicality. Associates with ties to militia groups across 3 states. The kind of man who spoke fluent self-improvement while keeping very different company after hours. But the real discovery came when I cross-referenced property records with federal databases my old contacts still gave me access to. Jace's yoga studio occupied a warehouse space 3 times larger than necessary for meditation classes. The building permits showed modifications for storage areas that didn't appear on any public floor plans. I leaned back in my chair, pieces clicking together like a puzzle I'd been solving without knowing it. Lana's mysterious investments in Jace's business, her sudden interest in firearms safety courses, the way she'd started asking about my military background, specifically my weapons training. My wife wasn't just having an affair, she was financing something much more dangerous. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in 2 years. Ryland Foster's gun range. We're closed. Rye, it's Rowan Kerrick. A pause. Well, I'll be damned. Thought you'd forgotten us common folk now that you're living in mansion country. Ryland Foster had been my sergeant in Afghanistan, the kind of soldier who could field strip a rifle blindfolded and spot trouble from a mile away. After discharge, he'd opened a gun range on the outskirts of Austin, catering to law enforcement and military veterans who wanted serious training, not weekend warrior fantasies. I need a favor, Rye. Information about someone who might be moving weapons. This about your wife's boyfriend? The question hit me like cold water. What do you know about that? Rowan, half the guys who come through here know your situation. Jace Arnell's been bragging about his rich married girlfriend for months, says she's bankrolling his expansion into private security consulting. Private security consulting. That was a creative way to describe arms trafficking. How much do you know about his operation? Enough to stay clear. Word is, he's got connections to some serious groups, the kind that stockpile weapons for when the government comes calling. Your wife picked a real winner. I closed my eyes and tried to process this. Lana wasn't just cheating on me with a life coach. She was funding domestic terrorism with our joint savings account. Rye, I need to see his setup. Tonight. Rowan, that's not smart. If he's running guns like I think he is, there's going to be federal attention. You don't want to be anywhere near that mess. I'm already in the mess. My name is on the bank accounts funding it. A long silence. Meet me at the range in an hour. And Rowan, bring your old gear. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. I hung up and stared at the screen showing Jace's criminal record. 20 years of marriage, and I'd never suspected my wife was capable of this level of deception. The woman who cried during animal shelter commercials was financing weapons sales to militia groups. The house felt different as I moved through it, gathering equipment I hadn't touched since leaving the service. Night vision goggles, electronic lockpicks, the kind of tools that had kept me alive in places where asking permission meant getting shot. Lana's latest text showed her location at Jace's studio. Perfect timing. I loaded everything into my truck and headed for Rye's place, mind racing through possibilities. If federal agents were already watching Jace, approaching his operation meant risking everything. But if I didn't act soon, Lana's involvement would destroy both our lives when the investigation went public. The smart play was to call the FBI and hope for the best. But smart plays were for people who hadn't just discovered their wife was financing domestic terrorism while complaining about their sensitivity. Sometimes you had to get your hands dirty to clean up the mess. The gun range sat on 20 acres of scrubland, far enough from civilization that gunshots didn't bother anyone. Rye met me at the gate, looking exactly like he had 15 years ago, lean, weathered, and ready for trouble. You sure about this, Kerrick? Once we start down this road, there's no going back. I thought about Lana's 5 lines, her secret phone calls, the way she'd looked through me for months while planning whatever this was. The road back disappeared when she chose him over me. Now I just want to know what I'm dealing with. Rye nodded and opened the gate. Then let's go find out what your wife's been buying. Jace's studio occupied a converted warehouse in an industrial district where security cameras were suggestions and questions weren't welcome. The building looked innocent enough from the street. Yoga mats visible through the front windows, inspirational posters about mindfulness and inner peace. But the rear entrance told a different story. Rye and I watched from across the street as two men unloaded wooden crates from a panel van. The crates were military surplus, the kind designed to transport weapons safely. The men handled them with the careful efficiency of people who knew exactly what they contained. 40 crates minimum, Rye whispered. That's enough firepower to outfit a small army. I adjusted the night vision scope and counted vehicles. Lana's BMW sat next to Jace's truck, confirming she was inside during this operation. Whatever story she'd told herself about wellness investments and life coaching, she knew exactly what business she was really in. Federal surveillance? 2 unmarked cars on the next block. They'd been watching this place for weeks. The implications hit me like a freight train. When the feds moved on Jace's operation, they'd find Lana's financial fingerprints all over it. Bank transfers, investment contracts, probably her signature on rental agreements and purchase orders. My wife wasn't just having an affair with an arms dealer, she was his business partner. We need to get closer, I said. Rowan, this is insane. Let the feds handle it. The feds are going to arrest my wife along with everyone else. I need evidence that shows she was manipulated, not a willing participant. It was a lie, and we both knew it. But Rye had been with me through enough operations to recognize the tone of voice that meant arguing was pointless. We moved through the shadows between buildings, using skills that felt rusty but familiar. The warehouse had minimal security. Jace relied on isolation and the threat of violence rather than technology. A mistake that was about to cost him. The rear door yielded to Rye's lockpicks in under 30 seconds. Inside, the space was divided between a legitimate yoga studio in front and something else entirely in back. Rows of weapon crates lined the walls, each marked with codes that identified caliber and quantity. I photographed everything with a camera designed for surveillance work, documenting serial numbers and shipping labels. Enough evidence to connect Jace to suppliers across multiple states. But the real discovery sat on a desk in the corner office, financial records showing the full scope of Lana's involvement. She hadn't just invested in Jace's business. She'd structured it, created the shell companies, established the banking relationships that made large cash transactions possible. My wife, the wellness entrepreneur, was also a money laundering expert. Rowan, we need to go. Now. Rye's urgent whisper snapped me back to reality. Car doors slammed outside, followed by voices I recognized. Lana and Jace, returning from wherever they'd gone during the delivery. We moved toward the rear exit, but footsteps in the alley cut off that route. The front door opened, and light spilled across the yoga studio as they entered. The new shipment looks perfect, Lana was saying. Your contacts really delivered this time. Told you I had everything under control. By next month, we'll have enough inventory to supply 3 different groups. I pressed against the wall, separating the studio from the storage area, listening to my wife discuss arms trafficking with the casual tone she usually reserved for grocery lists. What about your husband? He's been asking questions about your schedule. Rowan's harmless. He spends all day staring at computer screens and thinks everyone else is as boring as he is. He has no idea what real business looks like. The words stung more than they should have. 20 years of marriage, and she saw me as nothing more than a harmless computer nerd who couldn't possibly understand her sophisticated criminal enterprise. Time to show her how wrong she was. We slipped out through a window in the storage area while they continued planning their next shipment. Back at the truck, I uploaded the photographs to an encrypted drive and sent copies to 3 different secure locations. What's the play now? Rye asked. Now I make some phone calls, and then I plan a dinner party. A dinner party? I smiled, feeling something cold and calculating settle into place where my marriage used to be. Lana wants space to find herself. I'm going to make sure she gets all the space she needs. The drive home took 20 minutes, but it felt like crossing into enemy territory. Every familiar landmark looked different now that I knew what my wife really was. The house we'd built together had become a crime scene, where I was both victim and investigator. Lana's car was already in the driveway when I arrived. She met me at the door with a smile that would have fooled me a week ago. "How was your evening, honey? You were out late." "Just catching up with old friends. You know how it is." She nodded and headed upstairs, probably to shower off whatever evidence she'd collected during her night of arms trafficking. I watched her go and started planning the most important dinner party of our lives. Because if Lana thought she deserved better than me, she was about to learn exactly what better looked like. Planning the perfect dinner party required the same attention to detail that had kept me alive in Afghanistan. Guest list, timing, menu, seating arrangements, every element designed to create maximum impact when the moment arrived. I sent invitations to 12 people: Lana's parents, her sister, 3 of her closest friends, 2 business partners from her wellness company, Jace, and a surprise guest who would arrive fashionably late. The theme was celebration, our 15th wedding anniversary, a milestone worth honoring with the people who mattered most to us. Lana loved being the center of attention, and this would give her exactly what she craved. "This is sweet of you," she said, reviewing the guest list over breakfast. "I didn't think you remembered our anniversary." "How could I forget? 15 years of marriage deserves recognition." She smiled and squeezed my hand, the gesture feeling like a performance we were both giving for an audience that didn't exist yet. The next 3 days passed in careful preparation. I hired caterers, arranged flowers, selected wines that would pair perfectly with the main course of justice being served. Lana threw herself into planning her outfit and discussing the party with friends, never suspecting that she was helping me orchestrate her own downfall. Meanwhile, I made other arrangements. The call to Agent Halford at the FBI field office was surprisingly easy. My military background and security clearance opened doors that stayed locked for civilians, and the evidence I'd gathered at Jace's warehouse provided exactly what they needed to move forward. "Mr. Kerrick, we appreciate your cooperation in this matter. The investigation has been ongoing for several months, but your wife's financial involvement adds new dimensions to the case." "What kind of dimensions?" "The kind that could result in domestic terrorism charges if she was a knowing participant. We'll need to interview her as soon as possible. She'll be available Saturday evening, 7:30, if that works for your schedule." A pause. "You want us to arrest her at a dinner party?" "I want you to give her the choice between cooperation and conspiracy charges, while 12 witnesses watch her decide. What happens next is entirely up to her." Agent Halford was quiet for a long moment. "Mr. Kerrick, I have to ask, are you certain about this approach? Once we move forward, there's no controlling how this unfolds." "Agent Halford, my wife has been financing domestic terrorism with our joint bank accounts while telling me I'm too sensitive to understand her business needs. I'm very certain about this approach." Saturday arrived with perfect weather and perfect timing. Guests began arriving at 6, and the house filled with conversation and laughter that felt surreal given what was coming. Lana moved through the crowd like a gracious hostess, accepting compliments on her dress and the beautiful table settings. Jace arrived at 6:30, looking confident and relaxed in an expensive suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. He kissed Lana's cheek and shook my hand with the firm grip of someone who believed he'd already won. "Beautiful party, Rowan. Lana's lucky to have someone who appreciates her." "I appreciate her more than she knows. In fact, I've learned things about my wife recently that have given me a whole new perspective on our relationship." He smiled and moved on, missing the warning entirely. Dinner conversation flowed smoothly through the first 3 courses. Lana's father told stories about his latest golf tournament. Her sister discussed plans for a European vacation. The business partners praised Lana's innovative approach to wellness marketing. Nobody mentioned arms trafficking or money laundering, but the evening was still young. At 7:25, I excused myself to check on dessert. Instead, I opened the front door and welcomed Agent Halford and his partner, Agent Martinez, both dressed in conservative business attire that could have passed for dinner guests if you didn't notice the federal badges. "Gentlemen, perfect timing. We're just finishing the main course." I led them into the dining room, where conversation stopped as 12 pairs of eyes focused on the newcomers. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Agent Halford and Agent Martinez from the FBI. They have some questions about Lana's recent business investments." The silence that followed was absolute. Lana's face went through several expressions: confusion, recognition, and finally a cold anger that I'd never seen before. "Lana Kerrick?" Agent Halford's voice was professionally neutral. "We need to discuss your financial relationship with Jace Arnell and his business operations." Jace started to stand, but Agent Martinez gestured for him to remain seated. "Mr. Arnell, you're also someone we'd like to speak with." Lana's mother found her voice first. "What is this about? What business operations?" "Ma'am, we're investigating illegal weapons trafficking and money laundering. Your daughter's bank records show significant financial involvement in the operation." The explosion of voices that followed was everything I'd hoped for. Lana's family demanding explanations, her friends backing away from the table, her business partners calculating how quickly they could distance themselves from the scandal. And in the center of it all, Lana stared at me with the kind of hatred that could strip paint from walls. "You did this," she whispered. "You set this up." "I just invited some friends for dinner, honey. What happens next is entirely up to you." Agent Halford cleared his throat. "Mrs. Kerrick, we can discuss this privately, or we can continue here, but we do need to discuss it." Lana looked around the table at the faces of everyone who mattered in her carefully constructed world. Her parents, horrified. Her sister, already reaching for her purse. Her friends, pulling out phones to text other friends about the scandal unfolding in real time. "I need a lawyer," she said finally. "That's your right," Agent Martinez replied, "but cooperation now could make a significant difference in how this proceeds." The dinner party was effectively over. Guests made hurried excuses and fled toward their cars, leaving Lana, Jace, the federal agents, and me sitting around a table decorated with flowers and the wreckage of 15 years of marriage. "Mrs. Kerrick," Agent Halford said, "we have evidence of wire transfers totaling over $200,000 to Mr. Arnell's business accounts. We have photographs of you at his warehouse during weapons deliveries. We have recorded conversations discussing inventory and distribution." Lana's composure finally cracked. "Rowan, how could you do this to me? To us?" I met her eyes across the table, seeing clearly for the first time in months. "You told me you deserved better than me, Lana. I'm just making sure you get exactly what you deserve." The federal raid on Jace's warehouse happened at dawn on Tuesday, 3 days after the dinner party that ended my marriage. I watched the news coverage from my office, seeing the place I'd broken into transformed into a crime scene crawling with agents and evidence technicians. The reporter's voice was professionally neutral. "Federal agents have seized over 40 illegal firearms and arrested 3 individuals in connection with a domestic terrorism investigation. The weapons were allegedly being distributed to militia groups across Texas and neighboring states." Jace's mugshot appeared on screen, looking considerably less confident than he had at my dinner table. The news didn't mention Lana's involvement yet, but that courtesy wouldn't last long. My phone had been ringing constantly since Saturday night. Reporters, neighbors, former colleagues, everyone wanting to know how I'd discovered my wife was financing domestic terrorism. I let them all go to voicemail and focused on the more immediate problem of rebuilding my life. The first casualty was my career. Word traveled fast in cybersecurity circles, and nobody wanted to hire the consultant whose wife was under federal investigation. Clients canceled contracts. Potential employers stopped returning calls. Within a week, I went from successful businessman to unemployable pariah. The second casualty was our joint finances. Lana's lawyer froze all shared accounts pending investigation, claiming I had manipulated evidence to frame his innocent client. My own lawyer explained that proving innocence in financial crimes was like proving a negative, possible, but expensive and time-consuming. The good news, he said, is that your cooperation with federal investigators will work in your favor. The bad news is that you're going to be financially ruined while this plays out. I almost laughed. Give up my house? Hell, I never liked the wallpaper anyway. But Lana's situation was considerably worse. The evidence I'd gathered, combined with federal surveillance, painted a picture of knowing involvement that her lawyers couldn't explain away. Bank records showing she'd structured the shell companies, photographs of her at weapons deliveries, recorded conversations discussing inventory and distribution. Her wellness empire collapsed overnight. Business partners fled. Investors demanded refunds. The meditation retreats and organic supplement sales that had built her reputation became footnotes in a story about domestic terrorism. The social destruction was even more complete. Larkwood Society, which had embraced Lana as a successful entrepreneur, turned on her with the vicious efficiency of a pack hunting wounded prey. Former friends gave interviews about suspicious behavior they'd noticed. The HOA president called emergency meetings to discuss property values. Neighbors who'd smiled and waved for years suddenly found reasons to cross the street. But the real revelation came when I discovered the truth about Nina Morales. Lana's best friend since college, Nina had been a constant presence in our lives for 15 years. She'd introduced Lana to meditation, encouraged her wellness business, and been the most supportive voice during Lana's transformation from suburban housewife to entrepreneur. She'd also been the one who introduced Lana to Jace. The connection became clear when I traced Nina's employment history and found a detail that changed everything. 5 years ago, she'd worked for my previous cybersecurity firm as an administrative assistant. 5 years ago, I'd discovered she was stealing client information and selling it to competitors. 5 years ago, I'd gotten her fired and blacklisted from the industry. Nina Morales had spent half a decade planning the perfect revenge. She'd cultivated Lana's dissatisfaction with our marriage. She'd introduced her to Jace, knowing about his criminal connections. She'd encouraged the affair and the business partnership that would ultimately destroy both our lives. But Nina had made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed I was the same harmless computer nerd who'd stumbled across her theft 5 years ago. She hadn't considered that I might have learned a few things about warfare in the years since. Time to show her exactly what I'd learned. The confrontation came at the Larkwood Community Center, where Nina had organized a wellness rally to support Lana and protest federal overreach. The event was supposed to rehabilitate Lana's image and raise money for legal fees, but it would serve a very different purpose. I arrived early and made my way to the audio-visual booth, where 2 decades of technical training made short work of the security systems. By the time Nina took the stage to address the crowd of 50 supporters, I controlled every camera, microphone, and display screen in the building. "Friends," Nina began, "we're here tonight to support a woman who's been victimized by an abusive husband and an overreaching government." I waited until she hit her stride, building sympathy for poor Lana, who'd been manipulated by criminal associates she'd trusted. Then I activated the projection system. The first image showed Nina's employment record at my former firm. The second showed her termination letter, specifically citing theft of confidential information. The third showed her bank records, revealing payments from Jace's operation that predated Lana's involvement by 6 months. Nina's voice faltered as she realized what was happening. The crowd murmured and pointed at the screens, showing evidence of her long-term deception. But I wasn't finished. The next series of images showed text messages between Nina and Jace, planning Lana's seduction and recruitment. Screenshots of social media posts where Nina discussed her hatred for the man who'd ruined her career. Financial records showing she'd profited from every weapons transaction her revenge scheme had enabled. Ladies and gentlemen, my voice echoed through the center's sound system. You're looking at the real architect of this operation. Nina Morales spent 5 years planning the destruction of my marriage and my wife's life, all because I caught her stealing and got her fired. The crowd turned to stare at Nina, who stood frozen at the podium like a deer in headlights. Someone shouted a question about the evidence. Someone else demanded an explanation. Nina tried to speak, but her microphone was under my control now. Instead, the speakers played recorded conversations between her and Jace, discussing how to manipulate Lana into deeper involvement with the weapons operation. The crowd's mood shifted from confused to angry. These were people who'd trusted Nina, donated money to her causes, believed her stories about supporting victimized women. Learning that she'd orchestrated the very victimization she claimed to oppose triggered the kind of mob justice that suburban communities specialized in. I watched from the booth as Nina fled the stage, pursued by angry supporters demanding answers she couldn't give. The rally dissolved into chaos, with former allies turning on each other and reporters capturing every moment for the evening news. But the real satisfaction came from knowing that Nina's carefully constructed reputation was as destroyed as Lana's had been. Her wellness consulting business would collapse, her social connections would evaporate. Her revenge scheme had succeeded in destroying my marriage, but it had cost her everything she'd built since. I slipped out of the community center as police arrived to restore order, walking through the parking lot where Larkwood's elite tried to distance themselves from the scandal they'd just witnessed. My phone buzzed with a text from Lana. "You've destroyed everything. I hope you're satisfied." I typed back, "You wanted to find yourself, honey. Mission accomplished." The story ended there, in a parking lot filled with the wreckage of lives and reputations, under a Texas sky that promised more storms to come. I'd lost my marriage, my career, and my place in the community I'd called home for 15 years. But I'd also learned something valuable about the price of underestimating the quiet guy who worked with computers and didn't play golf. Sometimes the villain really does survive the story, and sometimes that's exactly what justice looks like.